so that my brother's friends would all call me Little Fro. I had an afro. So basically you can imagine this 4'11" kid who's never lifted weights. I looked like Seth from Superbad, you know, the movie. And so
perfect picture. And welcome to the Darren Woodson Show. Thank you for joining us this week. We're going to jump right into it. We're really excited about our guest and none more than Ben. Ben is super excited about this.
It's about time we talked about something that actually means something.
That's right. So for those of you that have listened to the show, Ben has been a trainer for many years, got into real estate a couple of years ago. But there was still a gap. There was a hole in him that he had to get into training. So he does like some personal training with people with our company and some friends and family.
Me.
And
Darren.
Yes.
So if you don't like the way he looks, I don't train him anymore.
Yeah. Just so we're clear. But you know, to speak to that, Ben's entire training regimen comes from the man that we're about to talk to. Ben is actually a certified Googler, not a certified trainer. Because I'm
a professional researcher. And I pass on nothing original. But seriously, what Tyler's saying, honestly, when I first got into training, gosh, was that 2014 is when I first discovered you and what you're doing. And we spoke to Dr. Lane Norton on a previous episode. Yeah. And what I appreciate about both of you guys is because the fitness industry, everybody knows, it's the wild, wild west.
Full of
and there's just so much BS out there. And what I appreciate about you guys is you cut the bull crap and you spread the truth. It may not be sexy. It may not be what people want to hear, but it's the truth and it gets the best results. So that's what draws me to you. That's why we're excited to have you on.
Who is you? Yeah, we haven't brought in Eric.
That's
Cressey.
True.
We have not brought in Eric Cressey. And Eric, again, you know, we're going to get into the meat of what you do today and how impressive the work is that you do. But we want to go back and we want to talk about the journey and the reason why you got into this. But let's start going to your childhood. You know, where are you from, Eric?
Yeah, I'm from Kennebunk, Maine, basically southern Maine. It's not quite the middle of nowhere, but it's about an hour from there.
Kennebunk, Maine.
That is nowhere.
Our claim to fame, we were the summer White House when George H.W. Bush was in office. So we had the president around in the summertime a little bit.
Hey, well, if it's good enough for a Texan, right, it's good enough for everyone else.
You know, I spent a lot of time in the Northeast at ESPN in Connecticut. Yeah. And a lot of the folks that had moved into that area were from Maine, and they talked about how beautiful it was. And they do, you know, they vacationed up in that area. I never had the opportunity to go up there, but give us a little more. Did you have did you grow up with your mother, father in your life, or was it? Talk us through that.
I was lucky. I came from, you know, a family with two parents for sure, and an older brother 4 years ahead of me. Kind of, I guess, paved the way for us. You know, what was really good is I actually, just from watching my parents. So I had a mom who was a teacher. She taught English in the 9th grade and actually eventually became the principal of my old high school and just retired this year. My dad was a school bus distributor. So he and my grandfather, they founded a bus distributorship. So they would basically sell bus to school districts and, you know, kind of cover the Northeast territory for Thomas Built buses. So I got to see the ultimate giver in a teacher. And then I got to see an entrepreneur. So you got to see the people who are woefully underpaid for what they did. You know, I saw her correcting papers in bed every night before I went to bed. And, you know, I saw the nights where my dad would get up at 3 a.m. and go write bids, you know, to school districts to make sure we could support our family. So I got like a very good, like, you know, hardworking, you know, I guess mentorship from my parents on top of what they did for me just as parents. And I think it sustained me a lot with respect to how I approach my own career.
Was it something that they would, you know, things they would talk about with you growing up, or was it more through action that you learned?
You know, I think it's action. I think you watch how people treat others. Like I can distinctly remember, so what I would do when I was a kid is I would actually get up early. I would usually go to school with my mom in the morning. She'd be there at, you know, 6:45 or whatever it was. So, you know, I grew up kind of like hanging out with high school students in her room, and they'd come in before school for extra help or whatever. And then I'd go out front, and me and several other kids who had parents who were teachers there would get on the bus together. But I never I guess back then realized it, but my mom would always have snacks in her desk. And it never made sense to me because she didn't eat them and stuff like that. Turns out she was feeding kids breakfast who didn't have food at home.
Oh, no.
Like, and you you never quite put it together. I think at that age when, you go to the grocery store and it takes 3 hours because there are so many parents that are, stopping to thank her in the aisles and stuff like that. But it's cool. I mean, she went back to teaching when I was in kindergarten, and, the legacy she's built in our hometown is really, really neat. Even in retirement, you get to kind of reflect back on it. But, I think it's served us well. And I think, a lot of our business has just been focused on, like, how do you give more than you take? How do you try to do the right thing regardless of the circumstance? And that's something I think she always did. And I really respected a lot. So it rubbed off on me.
That's awesome. Now, any siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother who's 4 years older than me.
Okay.
He's actually a certified public accountant, and
right.
he runs the family business now. He's in kind of the school bus world. But the funny story about Brian is so he was the first one to ever take me in a weight room. So I'll never forget. He's a senior in high school, and I'm in 8th grade. Let's just say my nickname at 8th grade basketball camp was the round mound of rebound. I was
You were a big kid, huh?
Yeah, I was not a stellar physique. I shopped in the Husky section. I wore elastic jeans. But if you guys can think of it, so when I had hair, it's really like, it's like a Brillo pad. It's bristly, it's wiry, it's curly. So in 8th grade, my favorite athlete growing up was Carlos Valderrama, the center midfielder for the Colombian national team.
Oh, yeah, the big fro.
Yeah, crazy flowing locks. And it was, 94 World Cup was in America. So that was when I was in 8th grade. So it was a cool time to be a soccer fan. So I grew my hair out so that my brother's friends would all call me Little Fro. I had an afro. So basically you can imagine this 4'11" kid who's never lifted weights. I looked like Seth from Superbad, the movie. And so
Perfect picture.
If you look around on the internet, you can find some pictures of it. But Brian took me into the weight room, and sure enough, I went in there. I got pinned under the 45-pound barbell, squirmed until they took it off me. And, that was probably 94, 95. And here we are, 26 years later, and I got a world record in the deadlift, and he's a 100-40-pound accountant, and I never let him live it down.
Did that open the door? I mean, did that moment open the door for you, or did you shy away from the weight room?
No, I wish it had, I think that could have been like that. Holy crap, I'm not nearly where I need to be. And I was too young to appreciate. I mean, I was a multi-sport athlete and stuff. And to be honest, what really opened the door for me, I didn't really get my act together with respect to understanding what I think I could be athletically until my junior to senior year of high school. I was a lot of people, our industry talk about if I'd only had my knowledge, 20 years ago, I would have been a Division I athlete and a professional. I would have been a fantastically mediocre, Division II athlete with good training. I wasn't, crazy upside, but as I was getting recruited to play both tennis and soccer in college, it was a lot of Division III interest. And I had good ball skills on the soccer field. I had good hands. I was a good tennis player, went all state my senior and everything. But the knock on me was always that I wasn't fast. I had better technical skills than I did athleticism. So my senior in high school, after soccer season ended, I kind of just flipped the switch and decided I'm gonna clean this up. I'm gonna start taking care of myself, and started trying to eat better with what I knew. I mean, this is 1998 at the time, and actually, believe it or not, the pendulum kind of swung really far in the opposite direction. I wound up with kind of an exercise addiction, eating disorder. I lost 80 pounds my senior year of high school. I didn't have 80 to lose. I probably had more 25 to 30 to lose.
Yeah.
And actually made myself pretty sick, and it kind of ruined my opportunity to play college sports, and had a couple hospitalizations, during kind of my summer before my freshman year of college and during my freshman year. And really struggled to find, what it was I needed to do to get better. Because I think anytime you see somebody in that dynamic, you kind of get lumped into the obsessive compulsive disorder, right? You find control in your life wherever you can. And I was a smart kid. I was salutatorian in my high school. I got into some good schools, but this was something I really couldn't shake. And I don't fault my parents for it at all. They didn't have nutrition know-how. That was back in the food guide pyramid, and the zone diet was just becoming a thing. And so really, I didn't get myself sorted out until my neighbor introduced me to a competitive bodybuilder in my hometown who had opened a gym. And I walked in, and it was the first guy I ever met who, in that context, had answers for me. I had a lot of questions, and everyone else was so focused on trying to throw a diagnosis on me or a label, all that stuff. It just wasn't the right mix. And he was a guy who empowered me. He gave me knowledge. He actually gave me my first opportunity. I worked the front desk at the gym every Saturday morning when I was home from school. It was one of those things where it wasn't like he was just delegating tasks to me. It wasn't just vacuum the gym. It was he was educating me and at the same time giving me a chance to gradually be successful and, get some points on the board respect to not just my career, but also my health. And so over the course of time, I kind of got my body weight back to where I needed to be and started getting healthy. And at the time I was actually at Babson College thinking I was going to be an accountant. And I realized I was much more passionate about counting plates on the bar than I was counting beans for tax returns. And so after my sophomore year, I transferred to the University of New England. And I did a double major in exercise science and sports management. And I was closer to home, so it allowed me to volunteer at that same gym. I commuted from home my last 2 years of school, and it was a perfect fit for me. And I always come back to, like, we're so quick, medically in the world to try to throw diagnoses on people that it's kind of that old Patch Adams quote from Robin Williams where, if you treat the patient, you fail a lot. If you treat the person, you win every time. And I look back and, I found the right mix. I was lucky too, where a lot of people don't. They struggle with it for much longer than I did.
So, okay. So I want to go back to that senior year. Yeah. What do you think the catalyst was for you to really take that turn maybe down the wrong path? And you started to see success and weight loss. And then what made it exponentially more addictive to you and continuing to do that? What do you think those triggers were?
The first thing I'll say is I absolutely believe that there is a genetic predisposition to this. There's some research that shows it. And certainly, talking to my mom, my brother, there have been other people in our family who have gone through stuff like this. I obviously was the most extreme. I mean, I weighed 97.5 pounds in a hospital bed at age 18 at one point. So, it was kind of like one of those things where a sinus infection almost killed me. But, I think for me, a big part of it was, you do whatever you can to find control in your life when you kind of have that kind of type A personality. And, you see, people who go through eating disorders, maybe there were folks who, were overcoming alcoholism, or they had abusive relationships or whatever it was. And I never viewed myself like that. I always viewed myself as a really bright athlete who couldn't find the answers that I wanted, that I didn't feel like they were out there no matter how hard I looked. Because you think about it, like I went to college in 99. I didn't send my first email until my freshman year of college. So this is 95 to 99. Like, you couldn't just go online and do what we kind of just talked about. Like, you couldn't, like in 2014, like, the world is your market. Like, you can go find a book from Tim Grover, who trained Michael Jordan, right? You can go and you can hit up a seminar that you learned about on the internet that's 15 states away because you think there's something you can help you. In 95 to 99, you basically had muscle and fitness, and then keep your fingers crossed that it'll work for you. And, that for me, it didn't work. So I needed to find someone who was a really, really good mentor. And it's something that I think I've always kept in the back of my mind, is that, you can put stuff on a piece of paper, you can write blogs, all that stuff, but some people really do need that person, in person, who can actually kind of help to show them the way.
You just mentioned something and it went right over their heads.
Yeah.
Muscle Fitness in 1995. These two, were you even, these two were barely born. They had phones. Trust me. You remember the era, Eric, when we didn't have phones. Remember? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No doubt. Two, they had phones at 9 years old.
Not until I was a junior in high school.
No, it's the truth, man. So they don't know what they get. Everything they've ever wanted, it's been right there. Google. Just Google it.
I don't remember the era. It was a big deal. So I shared my mom's Ford Taurus station wagon. And the thing, when I got my license, like, the second you hit 65 miles an hour, the dashboard started shaking uncontrollably. So it was like, I feel like my parents put it in there to make sure I didn't.
Wait a minute. They didn't have panels on the side, did they?
Yeah, it didn't. Thank God.
Oh, thank God.
Not that I had a whole lot of game, but that certainly would have taken even down another notch. But I distinctly remember getting in that car, and like, if we went to like an away soccer game or something, to like watch friends play, if it was like 4 or 5 times away, you took the mobile phone in the bag that you could plug into the cigarette lighter.
Yeah.
You feel like, hey, this is an $18 phone call if you make a call. So only use it for emergencies.
Come on, man. I grew up with an El Camino. That's what my dad drove early on.
So I drove a minivan as a junior in high school.
Still drive a minivan.
I drove a minivan. Yeah. So I don't want to hear this. See, I get the struggle, though. I feel the struggle that Eric went through, because you didn't have those resources that you could just go online. So you had to go through this learning process of actually getting in your car, driving somewhere to learn something.
Yeah, Eric, he's about to say that he used to drive to the library and do research at the library.
That's how I got.
I did it. I did it. Darren, what year were you born?
69.
Lying.
Okay, I was 81. I'm the first year of the millennials. So.
Oh, you're a millennial.
Yeah,
I am. I don't identify as a millennial, but technically, I think they're saying that we're supposed to be called like something else, like exennial or something like that. But I certainly don't identify as
that millennial scale has moved so much. I look at one, it's like, hey, if you're born in 82 or after, I was born in 84. And it's like, I try to not claim millennials if I can, but like there's no way around it. But I agree. I feel like that like 78 to 86, that needs to be its own little
I think it's
generation.
It's the crew that can identify like a Pearl Jam or a Soundgarden when it comes on the radio. Like
that's right.
It's embarrassing how few kids don't even recognize that.
Pearl who? Hey, something you were talking about earlier, not to take this back down to the dark path, but is body dysmorphia and how you view yourself. I'm going to be honest. I've never admitted this to anybody. This is literally the first time I'm admitting this. That's something I struggle with. It's something I still struggle with today. Honestly, you guys may not believe this or not, but I still today take my shirt off and think twice about it.
Wow.
Still to this day, because it's such a mental battle. If you work, because I was the same as you, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, very overweight, not in the best shape, didn't take training seriously. So my mind is still in that mode to this day at 32 years old. And so it's a very powerful thing if you let it run away with you. Now I've gotten better, obviously, and more confident, but it still is in the back of my mind of still being that kid.
Yeah. And the thing I'll tell you is that it's not uncommon. I actually know, Brett Bartholomew, Adam Bornstein, these are guys who are really prominent in the fitness industry, who are good friends of mine that have gone through some of the same stuff. I know Brett's, wrote in his book about his hospitalization. He works with a bunch of NFL guys. It's one of those things that I think it does draw a lot of people to our industry. It probably gives us some good perspective in hindsight. One of the things that I think it was certainly helpful for me that I think a lot of people never get to is when you just focus on how you look physically. It's a very outcome driven model. I think, obviously we've got a guy who played professionally. Like all that mattered was the process to get ready for Sunday, right? You didn't have time to think about how many abs were showing. And I think when you're all driven by this outcome oriented thing, that you lose sight of like how much fun you could actually have, chasing whatever dream it is you have. So for me, honestly, one of the things that, I got headed in the right direction, and, initially it was more about like healthy behaviors. And I realized, eating right made me feel good, and, it allowed me to do so many more things and, enjoy the relationships I had in my life and things like that. But when I got into powerlifting, it was life-changing for me, because I was a guy that was a, competitive athlete in high school, and then kind of struggled to find the right mix. And it was probably like 3 or 4 years in there where I was dealing with some of that stuff. And the second I started like focusing a lot more on like a competitive environment, it definitely made a big difference for me, and I was fortunate to have some success in it. And what was also good about it is that environment just it's so nurturing. It sounds weird to say that a bunch of 350-pound men who squat 1,000 pounds are nurturing, but they're you go to powerlifting meets and you see people who are cheering for like a 78-year-old woman who's trying to squat 100 pounds. You see a Special Olympics kid who's competing, and everybody's pulling for him. It's a really cool environment. And I always found that was the case regardless of who you was. I became good friends with a lot of guys who were double my body weight, and was fortunate to lift at, a really good powerlifting gym in Southside Gym, kind of after I finished grad school. And, I always look back, if I had shifted from an outcome driven perspective to a process driven perspective, I don't know that I would have gotten where I am with my career or even my personality,
Yeah, Eric, I want to keep going with your journey, but another quick thing, what you just said is I totally get it. And I think we all get it, is when we were playing, it was very easy. And I loved working out, right? When there was that goal to be prepared, and hey, now it's less about, okay, what the numbers are, but when it translates to the field on Sunday, I know that I'm going to be better than my competition, or I'm going to have an opportunity to win. And that was really easy. And when I was playing, it was really easy to say, hey, when I'm done, man, I can't wait to just enjoy fitness for what it is. And I don't have to do all these heavy back squats and, all these things that just make my body hurt. Well, I get there, and it is really hard, because now the only goal is physical appearance, and that's it. Because the mind shifts, because that end goal of performance is no longer really there. So a question for you is I know you work with a ton of athletes, in all levels, youth athletes all the way to Olympic and professional athletes. But how do you, if you're talking to someone that's a CPA or, works in retail, whatever it is, what would you say to them as far as, okay, from a motivation standpoint, it can't just be about physical looks. What do you say to them to get them motivated? Like you found powerlifting to say, hey, that's a goal that I can work for.
Yeah, I'm a big believer. So Chip and Dan Heath are some really bright guys. They're both psychologists. One's at Duke and one's at Stanford. They're brothers. They've written some great books. And one of the things that they talk about is basically how to make change easier. And, I think this is somewhat doom and gloom, but more importantly, I think there's a solution. I don't think we change people nearly as much as we think we do. I think we change the situations in which people operate. And that's far more profound, right? You see people who get out of bad relationships and all of a sudden they look like they're happy for the first time ever. You see the number of, how many athletes do you know who have kids and all of a sudden their perspective changes? They become better athletes.
Yeah. Yes.
Because it allows them to take their mind off it when they have a bad game. They have an escape. So I think you change the situation. And what we've always tried to do with our facilities is we want to be that third place, right? There's home, there's work or school, and then there's the additional place that you go. And I think, people, will criticize CrossFit at times, but I think they've done this tremendously well. They've peaked motivation because they have become that
community
place. Yeah. And that's what it is. If you just promise dumbbells and barbells, you're going to eventually, it gets old. I don't feel like lifting sometimes. Right. And it's something I'm good at, it should be something that, I love to do over and over again, but just like everybody else, like sometimes I get excited when I go on the road and there's a bunch of like random equipment at some hotel gym or, a commercial gym down the street from where I'm staying and go in and try it out. Because I do think we crave novelty, and we have to give that to people, whether it's in the actual programming, the exercises they do, or in the experiences they have with the people that they care about around them. And that's where I think the goal is to build community. It's why people, exercise success is substantially higher when people have partners to work out with. It's why you see packs of cyclists out there on Saturday morning, climbing hills together, and, why you see running clubs and, rowing clubs and places where there are rivers, like all that stuff. So I think it's more about changing the situation and putting people in places where they actually enjoy being before they actually even have to think about exercise.
Yeah. We talk about the accountability aspect of it, right? Yeah. If you don't have an accountability partner or community to help you with that, it's really easy to, internally just say, not going to go today. Yeah. But if you have the accountability aspect of it, it's super powerful.
Yeah. One of the sports too, like you think about it. You've been in clubhouses when there are a couple of bad apples. It's not fun to go in and practice or train or anything like that. You kind of have to keep the unconditional positivity, or at least the lack of negativity, I should say, in the right place to make that a fun environment to get your work in.
I know we're going to get to that point because I know you work with so many, professional athletes as well. And as you know, the egos are in those locker or in those spaces, and we're going to get there. But I want to go back to University of New England. So you're in school. What is the transition? What is because you're powerlifting, and now you're in college. What is your mindset going forward?
Yeah, to be honest, when I transferred, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in this realm. I knew I was at least passionate about it. Where UNE was really good for me is it's actually the only med school in Maine. So going into that department, we actually had access to gross anatomy classes. So they'd work with pre-med majors and physical therapists and occupational therapists and athletic trainers. So we'd have access to cadaver lab and stuff like that. And that was when I realized I was intrigued by anatomy, how the body moved. I think most people go into gross anatomy class and they're just trying not to get sick from the aldehyde, or they're grossed out by, whatever it is they see. And I was in cadaver heaven, as weird as that sounds. And what happened after that was I actually went to the University of the University of Connecticut for grad degree. And when I went to UConn, I didn't know whether I wanted to go into research, whether I wanted to get into like clinical exercise physiology, something like that. And one of my first weeks on campus, it was right after I just started writing. It was 2003, had a couple of articles published, and a guy named Brajesh Patel, he's now the head strength conditioning coach at Quinnipiac. Brajesh was a grad assistant strength coach there. And we had a couple of grad classes together, and he came up to me. He's like, "Hey man, I've read some of your articles. I really enjoy them. If you ever want to come hang out in the weight room, let me know." I was like, "I'd love to." He goes, "I have baseball at 5:30 a.m. tomorrow morning." And it was almost like he was testing me. Like, is this guy serious? And I showed up, and I always tell him, man, I'm like, in that moment, you changed my career. Like, I watched how he controlled a room. It was him with 25 guys, and just the way that he was able to succinctly get them to move the way he wanted to, the way he commanded a room, the way they respected him, the energy he did it. And he did it at the crack of dawn with a bunch of guys that didn't want to be out of bed that early. And in that moment, I'm like, I could see myself doing this for the next, 40 years. And so I was fortunate at UConn to kind of start doing more volunteer stuff. I had my grad assistantship actually funded through research. So while I was at UConn, I got to spend a ton of time with especially men's and women's basketball and soccer, which at UConn, I mean, we were lottery picks after lottery picks and national championships and #1 teams in the country. So it was a really cool environment. I had some really good mentors there as well who took me under their wing.
I wanted to talk about college strength coaches, right? And the differences between, because you've probably been around a ton of these guys. Yeah. What makes a good one, and then what makes, because I had one at Fresno State, and
you think I'll put somebody on blast?
I'll put him on blast.
Somebody on blast.
Hey, put his name in your mouth.
Rich Tucker. So this guy was there my first 3 years, and I kid you not, our strength training program was based off of Arnold Schwarzenegger's Modern Bodybuilding Encyclopedia. I swear on my life. And look, and the only reason I knew that is because in high school, Googled Arnold Schwarzenegger workouts. No, there was no Google. The Google didn't exist. But that was like, I love that book, right? Because as a senior in high school, like my only goal was like to have abs and arms. Like that was it, right? And Arnold gave me those things, right? But when now I'm trying to train for a Division I football team, and everything is pulling his life, squat deep, right? Yeah. That's the only thing. Press. And like you asked, like what the physiology and what the reasoning for doing what we're doing is, and he goes up to the bookshelf and he's knock-kneed. He can't even squat, and he pulls it down and he starts flipping through it to get his. I'm like, what? So that roundabout story as far as, but what are you seeing like in the collegiate level? Like what are the really good strength coaches doing? Because training has evolved in the last decade and especially the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is it's gotten way more specialized just in the past 5 to 10 years, and I saw it in particular, in the baseball world. Now we have guys that are baseball only strength coaches, and that never would have happened before. A lot of times, one strength coach would be carrying 6 to 7 teams by themselves. Like you have smaller Division I programs where it's, one strength coach still covering 20 teams. And I feel for those, those coaches. It's really hard to individualize at the highest level, but we are seeing like lots of really good steps forward. And where it's been cool, we've had a lot of former interns who are out there doing their things. Like, Brett Price is one of our guys who is at Alabama now, seeing what Brett's done. And we've run our baseball mentorships and, kind of taken a lot of those coaches under our wing from afar. So it is, kind of cool to see it changing. But I think it's across the board. I mean, that's hockey, certainly football, the compensation has risen dramatically for strength coaches. So we've gotten a greater level of specialization there. So it's definitely better than it was, probably even just, 10, 15 years ago. But I feel like that's the natural progression an industry should take. Like I look at the programs I wrote in 2005 and God, it makes me sick to my stomach. Like I should be going back and finding people and giving their money back. So I think that's, if you don't go back in time and look at what you did, 5, 10, 15 years ago and do a face palm, then you're probably not growing as a coach. You're probably having, 25 years of the same year of experience as opposed to 25 years of actual experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go. So your transition, I mean, why baseball? Why is baseball the field that you went towards? I mean, because you have football, you have the football programs, you got, basketball, whatnot. What was it about the baseball play?
Yeah. So I think there's an old saying, like if you want to build a business, solve a problem. And I think for us, so when I first left grad school and moved up to the Boston area and started out on my own, some of the first guys I started working with were baseball players, which was, to be honest, it was somewhat new to me because I'd been much more basketball, soccer at UConn. And it just so happened some of those first guys that first off season were baseball guys, and just in talking with them, learning what they had done in the past and all that, you realize that it's a pretty underserved population. Either they're handed the, clean squat bench football program, or they're told just do some band stuff, do kind of the foo-foo rotator cuff exercise. You don't need to lift, just do some wrist curls and you'll be fine. And, you realize pretty quickly that there's a happy medium between those two things. You can push those guys incredibly hard, as long as you're cognizant of some of the, the structural deviations from normalcy they may have when you look at their MRIs. you look at their asymmetrical presentations, and the functional demands of the sport. And I had kind of a little bit of a leg up in that. I'd had a bum shoulder from my tennis career, and I kind of learned how to work around it and avoided surgery. So I had a pretty good idea of how to manage the overhead throwing shoulder. And I realized that we had some success with these guys, and I was passionate about it. So I kept, just trying to continue to build some career capital in that space, researched a lot, talked to the right people. And it just so happened that first off season, it was 06, 07. Basically one of those 4 kids won state player of the year. He went like 12-0 on the mound. They won a state championship. All 4 of those kids went to play college baseball, and my phone started ringing off the hook. And all of a sudden this baseball niche was born as these high school kids became college guys became pro guys, and they had teammates they'd refer, some of them had agents that would refer players. Here we are now, we've got guys in all 30 organizations. And it really just happened because we tried to take care of this one population that I think was dramatically underserved.
So what was that dynamic like when you're having to deal with individual players and the school or whatnot is, trying to protect those players as well? I know you had to walk a tight rope in those conversations.
Yeah, it was definitely an issue, from 07 probably to 13, especially when we weren't as well known. Back then we were probably better known locally than we were nationally or internationally. And now it's actually probably the opposite. Like if you look at the caller ideas in the business, there's more calls from Indiana to Massachusetts or Florida than there are, from Florida to Florida or something like that. So, what I think it always comes back to is just treat people right, nurture relationships, try to be humble, try to help people. And we always tried to do that. And where I was fortunate is a lot of times I was interacting with these baseball coaches, strength and conditioning coaches at both the college and professional level in different capacities. Maybe it was speaking at a conference that they attended. So I spoke at like the ABCA conference in 2012 and 2014. I mean, that's 5,000 baseball coaches. And when you get in front of that audience and you automatically, kind of establish a level of credibility, everything gets a little bit easier. We started to get more big league guys, more guys that, like Tim Collins, him making it to the big leagues, the Royals at age 21, at 5'7", like that helped to put us on the map. In 2011, Massachusetts had an unbelievable draft class, and most of them trained at our facility. So I think there were a couple big compelling moments that allow you to maybe establish some credibility industry wide. But what was really cool, I would say, in the last 5 years of baseball, the professional ranks have gotten way more open-minded. All of a sudden we have so much more communication from team to team. You go to these off-season events and you can have big league pitching coaches rubbing elbows with high school coaches. Just in general, the internet, unfortunately it can escalate some people who are underqualified to stardom, but it can also connect some really good people who collectively, kind of create a scenario where like a rising tide lifts all ships. So I think that the caliber of coaching has gotten better and better.
So talk about, because Darren's sitting over here, he's about to start writing some notes down.
I'm ready to go, man. I have a 19-year-old, and we've been in youth club baseball, majored since he was 7.
Yeah.
And so I want you to go and answer your question, but we're going to go down this road here in a second.
Yeah, because Darren's sitting here, he's got a 19-year-old son, and he's going to listen to this episode. They're maybe 14, 15, 16-year-old, baseball, whatever, any sport. They need to understand why strength and conditioning is so important to the development of them as players. Because what you were talking about earlier, I actually was intern at the university I went to. I played football at Abilene Christian University, and I interned with a strength and conditioning coach. And I was in charge of baseball, tennis, and golf. And those players, at least at that level, could care less about what we were doing in the weight room. And so that's kind of the mindset. It's starting to shift, like you talked about. It's starting to shift a little bit. People are understanding the importance. But what I want you to talk to us about, and if a young kid's listening, I want them to know why it's so important to the development of them as a player.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted, right? Everything from work capacity to, the actual, quantifiable improvements and things like that. And obviously all the way up to strength and power development. There's certainly merits there. Here's what I'll tell you that the weight room can do that nothing else can do. It can immediately get you dramatically outside of your comfort zone, right? So, we see a lot of guys, who just have this remarkable ability to flip the switch. I mean, obviously you talk about guys like Max Scherzer, like I've been fortunate to be around Max. Like Max has this other level that people don't have, and it's because he's trained that. And I think what we have is, you know, I look at my training on a yearly basis, and right now, like I have a bunch of 7 out of 10 sessions, but if I'm consistent, like I can still, you know, maintain a pretty good level of fitness and really benefit from that. But, you know, I can sniff an 8 or a 9 here and there, maybe twice, 3 times a year, I find a 10 out of 10. I think we have a whole lot of kids out there that have never sniffed a 5. They don't even know what they don't even know what a 7 is.
Oh.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, we have, not just helicopter parents, we have snowplow parents that make everything easy for them.
Reach.
But I think the other thing you think about is like, you can very tactfully and quickly and easily hide all your failures in this world, right? We've got Instagram filters that make you look more attractive. You can just delete all the videos when you gave up home runs and, post the 94-mile-an-hour heater that you painted on the outside corner. Like, you can do all that stuff. And so I think we're safeguarding kids from failure, but the weight room never lies, right? It's super quantifiable.
Say that again.
Yeah.
Louder for the people in the back.
Yeah. There's like an amazing, like Henry Rollins quote about that. I can't remember what it actually is, but the weight room never lies. It's purely quantifiable, and you can make, really, really good progress if you're consistent with it. And so Mike Boyle's a good friend. Mike's been in the industry, as long as I've been on Alive. And I remember him talking about his daughter, is now in college. I think she won a national championship as a freshman. She's one of the really, really talented female hockey players in the country. And he talked about just getting in 2 lifts a week from age 11 on. So from ages 11 to 17, sometimes it was 4 days a week in the off season. Sometimes it was 0 or 1 when it was in season or they were traveling for a family vacation or whatever it is. But if you look at 7 years times 52 weeks in the year, that's 104, sessions a year. Like, if you get in like close to 800 sessions over the course of that period, when someone else doesn't take it serious, it's just this massive advantage. And honestly, particularly for female athletes, because it's even less accepted, unfortunately. And I'm especially cognizant of that because I have daughters, but that the weight room teaches you so many invaluable skills. But what it does above all else is it makes all your skill development work that much more effective. It gives you a rich proprioceptive environment. It gives you exposure to movement patterns you don't have elsewhere. It gives you stability in the ranges of motion you have. So if you're that gangly, 12-year-old who hasn't hit a growth spurt and you're just like kind of loosey-goosey, it puts some good stiffness in the right places. And what that does is when you go and you get a wide receivers coach or a pitching coach or a shooting coach or anything, they can do their job so much better. So I often tell guys, I'd love to get kids, in the weight room at like 12, 13. And the reason is not just because there's physiological benefits, but it's also because I don't have to undo bad habits. If they go and do their own, they mess around in the basement and I get them at 16 and they move like crap, like we've missed out on some really crucial formative years. So I'd rather have them learn it correctly from a young age. Not only that, there's a little bit of like the awe factor when a kid comes into a weight room at 12 or 13 and looks around and sees, high school and professional and college athletes doing their thing, where you kind of hook them at the right age before they get a chance to be apathetic about that stuff.
God, I wish my 19-year-old would have got hooked at that age.
Yeah.
Still can't find the weight room. But, the question I had for you, and the reason why I've been so, intrigued about having this conversation with you is because I've been in that club baseball world for many of years. And there's been so many, I've seen kids throw 70 at 10 years old, throw 75 pitches. What do you tell these, not only the coaches, what do you tell the parents that are these helicopter parents who follow their kids all over the country?
Yeah, at 10, think that their kid's going to be, a high school
the
draft
next Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
What do you tell these especially specifically these coaches who allow these kids to throw that many pitches on them off the mound?
Yeah. I think for starters, it is getting better. I'll say that pitchsmart.org is a great website that I send tons and tons of parents together to visit. The SMI has done a good job putting that out in conjunction with Major League Baseball, where they do have pretty specific guidelines. And, so we've gotten more pitch count regulations in the high school game, but certainly on the youth levels, it's getting better, but there's still issues there. And the problem is, unfortunately, they're not necessarily adherent to those numbers. That's just a number, and they think their kid is special and different and all that stuff. So what I've actually had good success with is, and I'm fortunate I can do this, is I show people that you can be successful doing it the right way. If a 13-year-old kid comes in and he threw 110 pitches the day before and his arm is hanging, I can walk him across the weight room and introduce him to a big leaguer who is a multi-sport athlete, never threw more than 100 innings in high school, was well managed. And you realize that most of those big league guys are thrilled to have that conversation because they want to grow the game. They know that's important, and we take care of our next generation. Because even if that kid gets, doesn't play beyond high school, he's a baseball fan for life.
Yeah.
Right? That's something we've got to be really, really cognizant of is growing the game and doing things the right way. So I always try to not just leverage numbers and percentages and injury risk and all that stuff. I try to put a person behind that lesson, and it's served us really well.
So what do you say, and I'm really intrigued by this, and especially to have you on, is I think baseball probably more than any other youth and high school sport is very, very specialized. Yeah. And kids play that year round. What do you say to the parents that are, hey, at 10 years old, you are only playing baseball and that's all you do year round? What is your thoughts on the multi-sport training?
Yeah, I mean, first off, the research supports that you're more likely to be a big leaguer if you don't specialize. Because usually what happens is, I think there's an old quote from Istanbul, who's a pretty well-known guy in the early sports specialization world. He says, early to ripen, early to rot. The ones that are the best players at that age, they're actually the more likely to get overused. They're the ones that get hurt. And we have like research study after research study. Literally a new one just came out like 3 days ago that I quoted that, talks about injury rates in guys who identify as, early sports specialization people. Like, you're better off slow playing it, right? It's like going to learn how to run a marathon, right? If you go out and you gradually increase your volume, you bump it up maybe 10% a week, whatever it may be, it works well. You find periods in the year where you take a step away from running. Maybe you cycle, maybe you lift, you cross train, you do well. If you go out and you sell out for the dream and wind up hurt, you miss out on so much development. So there's something to be said about having just like this steady linear path. And when you have an injury at youth levels, like it literally just sinks your ship, because that's such an important time to have consistent training. Like, you can make so much consistent progress just from puberty and showing up. Like puberty makes a lot of coaches look way smarter than they are.
How did you get him to do in his junior year that we never thought he could do his sophomore year?
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's funny. There's so many coaches that'll pat themselves on the back because, a kid hit that developmental milestone, but really in a lot of ways, it wasn't his doing at all. But I always come back to, like, all I want is consistent effort. Like, keep showing up. Learn how to put in good effort, and give me a bunch of 7 out of 10s over the course of a year, and you would be shocked at how good you can be in the long term.
Yeah, I have a 19-year-old again that plays baseball, and it's his love, it's his passion. And the one thing I'll speak specific to him is he had an injury his freshman year in high school, played shortstop, actually his sophomore year in high school, injured his shoulder, but it wasn't major. Yep. But his throwing motion changed.
Yeah.
And I could tell you his freshman and sophomore year, he threw the ball, he's shortstop. He could throw the ball from any angle that he wanted to throw it from. And then his senior year, lost it. And it became almost like the yips.
Yep.
In throwing the baseball. And I'm sure you get these questions a lot. How do you answer? Because I'm a football guy. See player, tackle him. That's all I know, right? So, in baseball, it's so specific on angles and what you have to do as far as, mental preparation. What do you tell a young kid like that's gone through this process?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll tell you is, remember, throwing a baseball is the single fastest motion documented in sports. It's 7,000 degrees per second of internal rotation at a shoulder. Like, you wouldn't just take like your 1983 Chevy Cavalier out to the Daytona 500 and like just basically put the gas pedal down and pray for the best. Like, so there is a fair amount of preparation that comes to it. And we do have to manage these kids. We don't have to baby them. We want to be careful about that for the reasons kind of I alluded to earlier. But I do think we need to give them a little bit of preparation and protect them, by changing the situations. And, a lot of that is just understanding, like, you push them into playing multiple sports. And I think the thing people forget is, like, playing multiple sports doesn't mean it's like you got to be on a football team in the fall, basketball team in the winter, and then baseball team in the spring. Like, you realize, like, you can go play pickup hoops, in the wintertime twice a week, and, do your strength and conditioning and get on a good throwing program. But what I'll tell you this is, like, we've had a lot of success developing really good high school arms at our Massachusetts facility. And part of the reason is, Massachusetts is not nearly as many people as our Florida facility. The weather basically does some of the hard work for us. You can't play fall ball past October 15th in Massachusetts.
Rough,
Your hands are freezing. And so a lot of those guys, they shut down at the end of July. They go into football preseason or soccer preseason, whatever it is. They basically play until Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving rolls around, the season ends, they get on a good throwing program. They get on 14 to 16 weeks before the baseball season starts in Massachusetts, the third week in March. They shovel snow off the field, and they play a 25, 30 game season, and then they go to summer ball. So they're kind of competitive from April 1 to the end of July, and then their developmental, the rest, like that fall spring split works so well. You can't do that in Florida. And it's why the injury rates are astronomically high down there. Everybody's trying to get a piece of you. Everybody wants you to play on their fall ball team. Everybody wants you to go to their showcase. So a big part of being successful, is really just being willing to say no. I think Trevor Moad's become a good friend more in the mental skills space. He works a lot with Russell Wilson.
We had Trevor on last week.
Trevor's amazing. And one of the things he talks about is the first step towards progress. The first step from going negative to neutral is elimination. Like, eliminate stupid stuff. If you're trying to, improve your diet, like, get the crappy food out of your house, right? If you're trying to improve your life, get negative people out of your life. There are events that you go to in baseball that are just negative for your development. You spend a fortune to go to this showcase, and you basically throw as hard as you can. And at a time when you're not ready, all you're doing is risking injury. And chances are you're not even going to get seen by anybody at that event. You're seeing kids get Division I scholarships off videos on Twitter. So nowadays, like, it's become much, much easier to develop guys, and get exposure for them if they're just cognizant of, like, trusting the process and doing things at the right time.
That's so it's so funny because it's so opposite of what you think. You think more reps, more time, more effort is going to get me where I want to go.
Yeah.
The opposite is true. Rest is super important in recovery.
Yeah. It's the right kind of reps. So here's the best example I can possibly give you. So I've been a consultant for New Balance since 2011. And we've been fortunate to do some really cool stuff on shoe design and helping to build their baseball brand and all that stuff. But one of the things New Balance does is the area code games. It's, aside from this year when it's kind of a weird thing, but they run the area code games in Long Beach. And basically that is your best, probably 220 to 250 high school players in the country. And they all come together, and you go to that, and it's the real deal. I mean, this is 95-mile-an-hour arms thrown to first-round hitters. Like, it's on another level, and it's huge for an outfielder from Massachusetts to go out there and be able to face an incredible arm from Arizona or California, because you don't get those kind of at-bats in high school ball here necessarily. So if you show well, it can bode well for you. And there have been some names, obviously, like Clayton Kershaw played there, and some of these other big names that have become big leaguers. You'd be shocked at how few of our big league guys made those rosters. Noah Syndergaard didn't make the Rangers roster. Aaron Judge didn't make the California roster. Craziest one ever, I was with the Team USA 18 and under national team in 2015. And there's a really sad moment where you got to cut guys right before, we go to play for a gold medal. Not everybody can be on a 20-man roster. And our coach stood at the front of the room, and he's like, you know what? For those of you guys who get cut, remember, we cut Mike Trout from this team.
Wow.
The greatest player ever didn't make it. And sure enough, from the kids that we cut that year when I was with Team USA, man, there were 2 first-rounders in that group that didn't make the national team.
Wow.
And other kids that were on the national team who are great kids and they're great ball players that didn't pan out to professional baseball. So we think that we can predict success so well. When I go and I poll, and I did this 3 or 4 years ago, I polled a room of like 30 big leaguers we had trained in the offseason. There was one guy that made his area code roster. Like, I asked Matt Scherzer.
That's amazing.
Matt Scherzer didn't even know what area code was. He was, he was a raw late pick out of high school and went to Missouri and learned how to work hard. And Corey Kluber, right? Corey Kluber only had a couple college offers out of high school. He didn't make it. So you just realize there are so many guys that, they grew 6 inches their freshman in college, or they found the weight room. And a lot of those other guys never panned out because they used up all their bullets early. They tried to, be everything to everybody at the wrong time. So, like, I can't tell you how many late bloomers we have, and it's it's a good message for a lot of the parents and kids that are listening here. Make sure you're working hard, work smart, and everything. But be careful about how you compare yourselves to people, because there are a lot of guys that find it between 18 and 20 instead of 14 to 16.
So the question I would have, and I want to be really specific here, is that there are a lot of kids that are out there, again, myself and parents that are out there that are looking to trying to look for the right direction as far as training for their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they can't make it up to here in Texas. You can't make it up to Massachusetts. You can't make it up make it up to Florida to see Cressey Performance.
Yeah.
How do they get the knowledge that they're looking for? Do they? I mean, if they want that performance from you, how do they get in contact with you?
Yeah. So I think first thing I'll tell you is there are resources everywhere, right? There are good coaches, way more than we realize. That's the cool thing about the industry is as much, as there's a low barrier to entry and there's some things about it that aren't awesome. There are more and more good coaches available, guys on the throwing side of things, guys on the strength and conditioning side of things, if you're willing to look. So I always tell guys, ask around, get a feel for who the people are near you who can really help out. In terms of us, we have the facility in Florida and Massachusetts. So we will have guys that'll, hop on a flight and come for 3 or 4 days and do an evaluation and learn as much as they can and, kind of take some distance-based programming home for them. And then, also there's amazing resources online that were never there before. Like, you can tweet videos of yourself to big leaguers to ask for mechanical advice. Like I wasn't there years ago.
Right.
Guys that'll interact with you and be really, really front and center on it. And that's just, it's a cool dynamic right now for the industry. There's some really good people that are working hard to make expertise more accessible. But, we do our best to do it in-house and then obviously try to lead from the front and putting content out there to help people as well.
Yeah. And we'll get to that towards the end of where people can find you specifically in your website and things like that. Yeah. There's a quote that, you've had some quotes in this episode so far. There's a quote, you know what, honestly, you may have said it. I don't remember where I heard this first, but I live and die by this in training is methods are many, but principles are few.
Yeah.
And so
that was Bruce Lee, right?
Maybe so. I heard in the strength and conditioning realm, but my point in saying that is if I'm an 11, 12, 13, whatever age, and I'm just getting into strength, excuse me, and I'm just getting into strength and conditioning, what are some of the principles, I realize it's a nuanced question, but what are some of the things that I can base a program around to set those principles from the beginning and set that foundation?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is regardless of the sport you're in, like there's an efficient way to move, right? We can debate whether a dumbbell goblet squat or a barbell split squat or a safety squat bar forward lunge or whatever it is. I think we can all agree that single leg stability is important for an athlete, right? Mm-hmm. So there are these crucial fundamental patterns, things like hip hinges, squat, single leg, push, pull, all these different things. So I think, step one is be exposed to a wide variety of movements, particularly as a young athlete. You want that really kind of rich proprioceptive environment where you're exposed to a bunch of different things, because what that does is it prepares you for the chaos of sports, but it does it in a controlled environment. And that's where the weight room can really kick in. When you go out and you sprint, you're putting 6 to 8 times your body weight and ground reaction forces on every step. Like that's pretty uncontrolled. You carry a backpack around at school, like it puts you in some weird positions. You jump out of a tree, these things that kids do all the time. They're way more chaotic than we could ever expose them to in a weight room. So I think there's that. So certainly expose yourself to a wide variety of patterns and preserve the patterns that you have. Certainly progressive overload is another one. Be, stronger next week than you are this week because of the stimulus that you've applied. I think another principle that's huge is out recover your peers. We get so caught up in talking about the training side of things that there are tons of high school athletes that literally if they just shut their phone off at 8 p.m. and got to bed earlier and ate well and slept well and did the right things on that front, hydrated, stayed away from sodas and instead drank more water. Like these are all things we know that can exponentially, improve your success rate. So, certainly that's a principle for me as well. I think consistency is a principle, right?
Yeah.
Continuously show up, and be around people who will push you to be better. I think, especially when we start to talk about athletes that are trying to take that next step. You guys are all, former competitive athletes. You've realized there are people that you've trained with, you've been around, who just were not good influences on you. And you have to make that conscious decision to pull them out of your lives and kind of move in a different direction. And you do that well after your athletic careers, right? There's some, there are parents of, kids that go to school or whatever with your kids that you don't see eye to eye with them. They're not the right fit for you. So I think some of those are the principles that I look at, but you try not to get too caught up in the nitty gritty of like the methods early on, because all those other, those are the big rocks that you need to prioritize much, much sooner.
Talk about even from a young age, I know, younger athletes are a lot more pliable than, professional athletes that, have spent a lot of time, creating this base foundation. But talk about to the younger athletes or parents of younger athletes, the importance of flexibility and mobility.
Yeah. So one of the things that's cool is we're actually learning more about kind of how to train kids throughout their lifespan. And, first off, the whole concept of like resistance training, stunting growth is completely overdone. Dr. Avery Fagenmont at the College of New Jersey has done some really good research demonstrating this. You don't have to worry about your kids stunting.
You mean if a kid's 14 and he's back squats, he's not going to stay 5'4" for the rest of his life?
Exactly. Obviously we're assuming like age appropriate stuff. You're not doing stupid stuff just to look impressive on Instagram. But, I think, there's some lessons there. One of the things that we know is that we have a young athlete kind of in that 10, 12 age range, maybe even 13. Like a lot of times they're just loosey-goosey. They're very hypermobile. They haven't hit their growth spurt. And that's where adding some resistance training can be so powerful because they get some stability in the range of motion they have. And it kind of prepares them for the growth spurt that's about to come when, the bones stretch out much faster than the muscles and tendons can keep up. So in a situation like that, that's a great time to get strong. What's interesting, and Greg Rose is a good friend from the Titleist Performance Institute, and they've talked a lot about kind of critical instance for training certain things. And one of the best times, believe it or not, to train power is during that adolescent growth spurt, when they're kind of going through that very tight. Think about what tight tendons do. They store elastic energy well. If you look at most of the fastest guys in professional sports, they're guys, with those long Achilles tendons, a lot of them to jump out of the gym and run fast and change direction. And so to some degree, I think we can leverage those really, really well. So
talk about me, Eric. Did you just
describe Darren?
I did. But certainly all along, man, the flexibility side of things is huge. Like you've got to train mobility. It's the ability to get into the posture / positions that you want, and honestly also be stable in those positions as well. So, that's all something that we attack in all of our warm-ups. And, for guys that need even more, we'll come back and we'll do some extra dedicated sessions. And, certainly there are initiatives, things like yoga, functional range conditioning, some of that stuff that guys will use also to kind of optimize recovery away from training sessions. So definitely a high priority thing. That's not the sexy stuff the young athletes love to hear about. But it makes a difference.
Yeah, it's part of it.
It's the boring, quote unquote, boring stuff. Functional range conditioning. You just referred to.
Yeah,
it's a great resource for pre-workout movement prep. Getting ready for your. I think as a young kid, I would just go to the weight room and just get after it.
Do your crazy eights and then hit it.
Let's go. And what you realize is the importance of movement prep and mobility if you need it. Now some kids they're hypermobile and they need their movement prep is more focused on stability training. So it's obviously all individual based and you need somebody that knows what they're doing, that can look at your kid individually and say, hey, you need more stability, you need more mobility. It's not a one size fits all. We would like it to be.
Make it a lot easier.
Yeah, it would be a lot easier, but I guess that's the beauty of, a really good coach versus not. So you were talking about, just movement, wide ranges of movement. Can you talk a little bit about the 3 planes of motion and what they are and why they're important in any strength training program?
Yeah. So your sagittal plane is kind of going to be the one everybody recognizes the easiest. That's straight ahead. So, think a squat, think a push-up, think, forward and back motion. Your frontal plane is going to be more side to side. So think of like a lateral lunge or, a skater jump, hiding, whatever you want to call it. And then obviously you have the transverse plane, which is a much more rotational. What we know about most sports is, they're a combination of all three, and that becomes particularly important as we're talking about rotational athletes who need to load and unload in all 3 planes of motion. And, I think historically in the weight room, we've always really trained the sagittal plane pretty heavily, particularly in the context of a lot of your classic bilateral lifts, squats, deadlifts, Olympic lifts. And they don't necessarily give us as much benefit, beyond just, really stimulating the nervous system, put on muscle mass and stuff like that. So I think it's always important to have an element of other stuff in there, things like throwing med balls and lateral lunges and rotational rows, just to give people, exposures. And where we see this actually a lot is, you think about a lot of athletes that come to professional baseball after college sports. Maybe they're in a college weight room where there's 15 power racks, right? So, they do a ton of barbell stuff, which inherently is kind of hard to do a lot of rotational training with.
Right.
You bring them into pro ball and all of a sudden they've got access to, some different initiatives, right? Maybe we use, some rotational rows on the cable. Maybe we look at, some eccentric overloading with something like a VersaPulley. We have the Proteus in our facility. We have all these different ways to kind of give them a stimulus that they haven't previously happened. And, there's an old saying, like, the best program is the one you're not on. So you're always just trying to chase this adaptation that guys haven't previously found.
Yeah, that's the thing is you get impatient. You program hop. You think, oh, this next program is going to be the one that's got the secret. The secret, like you were saying earlier, is consistency. It's showing up every day. It's giving that 7 out of 10 at least effort. That's where you can get your bang for your buck, is showing up and putting in the work.
Yeah. And it's recognizing your own inherent biases, right? Like, there are exercises that I enjoy better than others, right? You look at people, they go to social media to post to just reaffirm their own beliefs. They go there to find people who will agree with them and tell them how awesome they are. And, we know that's probably not the best fit. Like, for me, right, I'm a strong guy, but I'm not necessarily very reactive. If I want to run faster, going and putting 100 pounds on my deadlift is not going to make me faster. It'll probably actually slow me down more. I need to sprint more, do more change of direction, do more jumping, stuff like that. So just doing what you're always good at and what you enjoy the most isn't necessarily the way to get where you need to go.
Talk about that, because I want to settle there, because that was really, a big part of my training was, like, I was like you. I was not a fast guy, right? Like, that was something that I always struggled with.
No.
Like,
had they time your 40 again? Would they use the time?
By the way, and you talked about, like, rotational stuff. Like, I was on a train track when I played football, so I only needed to do the forward-backward movement. That's all I needed for my functionality of my position. But no, talk about that, like the ability to increase speed, right? And what that takes, because you look at these, sophomores and juniors in high school that, hey, I'm running a 5.1, I'm running a 5 flat, but to get into college, I've got to be sub 4.8, obviously depending on the position. But really, what are the key ingredients of improving, your 40 time, your 20 time, your 10?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing I'll tell you is think about this continuum, right? So you have absolute speed. That's running, jumping, throwing a 5-ounce baseball, whatever it is. It's all very unloaded stuff at one end of the continuum. So that's over here. At the other end of the spectrum, you have absolute strength. That's lifting really heavy stuff, back squat that takes 10 seconds to finish the rep, bench press, whatever it is. And then you have a lot of stuff in the middle, right? Maybe you have, like, Olympic lifts is like a strength speed type movement. You got some med balls, which are more speed strength, maybe like some weighted plyos, stuff like that. So you have this whole continuum to train. What we realize is that when you're 13 and you've never lifted a weight, you don't even get to have that conversation, because a foundation of strength buys you a seat at the table, right? You can't talk about fancy stuff if you haven't gone through, you can't do calculus if you haven't done algebra first. So the first thing I would say is you got to build a foundation of strength. And once you've done that, effectively what you've done is you've pushed the absolute strength end of the spectrum to offset the fact that everything you've done in Little League and Pee Wee football, all that stuff has been at this absolute speed end of the continuum. And once you've got this foundation of strength in place, then you start to realize that you can benefit a lot from the stuff in the middle. And that's why, like, when I look at a young athlete, like, you can make progress on as little as 40% of 1 rep max, right? Just by showing up, grooving technique, optimizing neuromuscular recruitment, how well that brain, the spinal cord, those peripheral nerves recruit all those motor units and teach you how to use muscles, right? And eventually, then you can get to the other stuff where you can benefit a lot more. I think what we historically see is we see a lot of athletes who start out weak, then they get strong, they realize it makes them a bunch faster, but then they keep selling out for that dream because they don't realize that adding more force isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is learning how to use that force quicker. Right. And, I think this is also where we see, look at the NFL, right? We see a ton of guys that go to college and they get freaky strong, right? They move some insane weights and they get in the NFL and they a lot of times take a step back. I mean, first off, the game is played at insane speeds and you're much more banged up after games and all that stuff. But they can do that because they've built that foundation of strength to tap into. So they can probably train more rate of force development, more speed, strength, stuff like that. And then do just enough volume to keep their body weight up where it needs to be. Baseball is a lot different than football in that regard because it's not as accepted to get brutally strong in college. And not only that, we have a lot of international players where you might get a kid that we signed out of the Dominican Republic at age 19 or 20 who's never picked up a weight. So he's got to make up the time that he might have missed on that side of things. So, everyone starts in a different point, but you have to be honest with yourself. Where do you stand on that absolute speed to absolute strength continuum? And then you figure out where you need to kind of fill in the gaps. If you're a power lifter and you want to play in the NFL, you better start running fast and changing directions. If you're, weak as can be and you've never been in a weight room and you want to, go and compete at a higher level, you probably need to put some strength and some muscle mass on.
I got a 2-part question for you along with the lines of of Tommy Johns. And I know it's been a devastating injury for a lot of pitchers over the years. The first part is, why has it been such a huge problem early on? And then that second question would be the recovery side. How are they training, post-surgery to recover from this?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is one of the challenges is an elbow is a hinge joint, right? It's really predominantly built for flexion extension. When you go to throw a baseball, you lay your arm back and you go from flexion extension, but in the process, you get an element of valgus stress. So you get this little ligament on the inside of your elbow that takes on a lot of that force. And, we can easily rupture it in models and cadavers. Obviously in the real world, we have, soft tissue structures that cross the elbow that help to protect it. And, we can get the shoulder moving the right way and certainly manage the positions that it's in to keep it healthy from a mechanical standpoint. But that's the challenge with the UCL, is that it's a very, very small structure that has to, control a high velocity movement in a pretty tight window. And when it goes, it's debilitating. It's very, very hard to throw with a partially torn UCL, let alone a full tear in your UCL. So that's why it's been so devastating, is that it's a limiting factor, right? It would be like trying to play in the NFL with a ruptured Achilles. You can't do it. So with that said, as you alluded to, the rehab is long and arduous. It's a problem because you have to ask a tendon to become a ligament. So that process takes time on a couple of fronts. One, you have to respect the initial repair where, they're going to drill, basically holes in two bones and thread that thing through and tighten it up so that you repair what previously was there. And then that graft has to take time to stretch out. And then it also has to take on the properties of a ligament as opposed to just a tendon. So there's a feel component to it. And out of that, there's usually some concurrent stuff that's going on. Guys may have bone spurs removed. They may have loose bodies in the joint. They may have their ulnar nerve moved to the other side of the medial epicondyle. So it's a small joint that has a lot of stuff going on, and it's a vulnerable position during the throwing delivery. So unfortunately, it's become a multi-billion-dollar question in the baseball world. Here's what I can tell you. I don't think that this is a function of Major League Baseball doing a lot of things wrong. What we know is that when you look at injuries in the really big grand scheme of things, what's the number one predictive factor for an injury? It's a previous injury, right? If, we talk about the hamstrings injury epidemic, like a lot of times that's a guy who pulled his hammy and then he goes and pulls it 7 or 8 more times over the course of his career, just because that tissue never aligns the way that it should. I've looked at a lot of teenage elbows over the years, especially now that I'm in professional baseball. Like, you can see every single elbow is broken by the time it gets to age 18 now. What happens, and we're realizing this more and more, and Dr. Andrews has spoken about this very prominently, is when you see these 21, 22-year-old kids who are throwing 97, 98, and you go in and you do their Tommy John surgery after they rupture that ligament, when they look at it, that little ligament has areas of previous calcification. So in other words, they had these low-grade injuries when they were 12, 13, 14. When they got overused, they threw really hard when they were young. They didn't even necessarily perceive it, or they did, and they just thought it was, whatever else. And those areas basically, it doesn't just heal like if you fracture your arm and your radius heals up. It's more of a calcification that eventually becomes like a point of weakness on the ligament. So a lot of times, I think this is definitely, honestly, the case when Japanese players come to the U.S. and we see ligament issues thereafter. A lot of times they blame American training techniques, but we know that the Japanese youth pitchers tend to get way more overused. We have studies that show it, that their elbows tend to be uglier than American elbows at a young age, just because they throw so much. They're also, generally they're, from an ethnic standpoint, they're more predisposed to hypermobility, which can make that ligament a little bit looser. So I think a lot of these injuries that we're seeing in the 18 to 25-year-old age range, they're guys that really did damage at the youth levels, and it just came to fruition. And you realize when you go and you look at all these things, we're not seeing a lot of like 33-year-old grizzlied MLB veterans who blow out late. If you've been pretty healthy to age 30, you stand a pretty good chance of going out there and continuing to do your thing. Maybe it's a low back, or, you roll an ankle covering first base or something like that. But, and that was something Jeff Passan, who's an ESPN writer now, talked about. That was kind of the biggest takeaway for me from his book, The Arm, is the only thing we know about arm injuries is that previous arm injuries predict them well.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So
take care of your kids,
Yeah.
That's it.
Can you Can you talk a little bit about, we focus a lot on athletes, and as well we should. Can you talk a little bit more about the general public and why strength training is so important for just the general, if I'm a 40-year-old guy and I'm a little bit out of shape listening to this episode, why should I start
a 35-year-old little out of shape hosting this episode?
Why should I start a strength training program?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. Actually, way more than a couple. There's a myriad of things, right? There's a reason we're trying to figure out how to load astronauts in space flight because we're worried about them, having bone and muscle loss. So, there is dramatic stimulating properties on both of those fronts, right? So, like, I had a DEXA scan before my first year of powerlifting, and then 11 months later, I put on 1/3 of a pound of bone at age 23. Like, that's a big deal. And if we're talking about females, right, you're not building bone density when you're 60 or 70. You're trying to hold on to it. So if you can use it to stimulate that, that's a really, really big deal. We adapt to the loads we get put on. So beyond just the simple fact that allows us to build some muscle mass, we know resistance training tends to increase androgen receptor content. So it makes us more sensitive to hormones that, keep us young and vibrant, things like testosterone and all that. And, that's something that tends to fall off as we age, right? We lose a lot of, those beneficial levels, and, testosterone to cortisol ratios, change for the worse. I think beyond that, we just saw some really good studies that came out that showed like cognitive benefits for resistance training. Symptoms of Alzheimer's is a big one. The one that I think is the biggest one, though, is we know that one of your biggest risk factors when you get old for dying is a fall. Like if you fracture your hip, that's I mean, people are talking about coronavirus right now. Like they should be just as scared of falling in the shower and fracturing a hip, because it predicts mortality at a very, very high rate. Mm-hmm. What protects you from something like that? Your ability to right the ship. When you slip and you fall, bad things tend to happen. And a big part of that is not having your power fall off. We know that strength is the foundation for power. And, it tends to fall off decade by decade by decade. So a lot of the work you put in to create a foundation at age 35, 40, 45, 50 are the things that are going to help to sustain you once you're, 80, 85. And just anecdotally, my grandfather passed away in 2010 at age 88. And he had Alzheimer's that got progressively worse over the years. He had polio in one leg. So he had basically a left leg that really didn't work particularly well. He had a transfer of a tendon from his toe to replace his Achilles tendon when he was 4 or 5. But when he was 80, he slipped on the ice and he broke his right kneecap. And looking back on it, it was the thing that made him a little bit more sedentary. Like he kind of stopped going to the gym. He was a little bit more reluctant to go out on walks and things like that. And cognitively, in the last 8 years or so, he declined really, really fast. And that could have been normal aging. But I look back on that, and he didn't have a good leg. And I think it had a really profound impact on a lot of the stuff that was happening up here as things progress. So I always come back to it as like you're putting money in the bank when you exercise consistently at a young age and build a good foundation. And not only that, like I want to be able to go and get back into playing tennis when I'm in my 60s, my 70s. Yeah. Like I want to feel like if I want to play golf 6 days a week, I can do it and not worry about stuff. So I don't anticipate I'm going to be deadlifting 600 forever. But if it sets me up for being able to do some cool stuff when I'm in the nursing home someday, it makes me feel a lot better about the efforts now.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, life is easier when you're strong. And I'm not saying you're going to go deadlift 700 pounds. Yeah. But when you're strong relatively to your capability, life is easier when you're strong.
Yeah. You know what I think is a great indicator? And obviously you throw everything out the window kind of past age 80. Can you put your own luggage in the overhead compartment on a plane? Like that for me, when I see that, like either your bag is too big or you really need to get serious about.
That's why Darren always asks Ben and I to travel with him.
I've never touched a bag. One thing I wanted to ask you work with a lot of professional athletes. Yep. And the one thing that a lot of young kids are always asking me is, what is the mentality of those professional athletes? You see them more than I do. You're seeing them from all different ages. Tell us about their mentality, the ones that are really successful in their profession. What is it about them that makes them special?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is, at least in my world, big leaguers come in all shapes and sizes, right? We have guys that are 6'9" and we have guys that are 5'7", right? And they span a huge gap. Some are tight, some are loose. So there's all kinds of different ways physiologically that you can be successful. What I think I can speak to, maybe I'll qualify your answer and I'll say the ones that are really successful for a long time, the ones that have sustainable success, not just the flash in the pan, For me, there are a couple things. I think the first one is that they're open-minded, because you understand, it's good conversations with, guys like Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer and Corey Kluber and what they're doing well into their 30s now. It has to be different than what they did at 25. And for them to be sustainable, for an extended period along those lines, you have to be open-minded, because if you keep doing the same thing, even if you have a really established routine, things change, right? After age 30, like tissue extensibility is not as good, bounce back quite as good. So you have to be cognizant of the ability to adjust. So you have to establish a routine early on in your career, but then learn how to modify it. The second thing I would just say, and this is probably the biggest one, is the ability to tune out distractions. And the distractions become more and more prevalent at the high school age now. Like it's shocking how many distractions there are, for kids, and just the ability to shut your phone off while you're training, to not go and check it in the cubby between every set. And when
I feel like you had to deal with that a little bit.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like we used to, for a long time, we banned cell phones on the floor. Like I've heard stories about guys, forcing guys to leave them in a basket as they walk in, and I've thought about it.
My wife does that to guests at our house, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually did, to be honest, we have before coronavirus, we had a kind of a standing staff breakfast at our Massachusetts facility. And when everyone went to breakfast, that was the rule. You put your phone in a pile in the middle of the table for that hour, once a week. And I left my phone at home accidentally, a couple of days ago. And those 2 hours were liberating just to get a break from it. So I think the ability to tune out distractions, and obviously, if we're talking about big time athletes, playing for successful teams that are, $1 billion+ brands, the ability to just fly under the radar and be able to tone down and get to sleep at night and stuff, to tune all that stuff out is really, really important. So I think, the ability to get distractions out of the way is across the board. We've seen players that have, struggled at the highest level as they go through divorces, or they have a sick kid at home, or whatever it is. Stress is stress, no matter how you, no matter how you kind of calculate it, but it does take out, from your ability to recover. And you just have to be cognizant of all those things are building up to create, a perfect storm of challenges for you.
How much do you see a correlation between passion for the sport, right? You can tell when a guy just loves ball, they just love it. Yeah. I mean, how many guys do you see that maybe don't have the passion, but just have the talent, that are still able to succeed, versus the guys that maybe don't have the talent, but have the passion?
Yeah. I mean, passion is not a way to leverage a career. It doesn't. I mean, that's every career. That's not just pro sports, right? Follow your passion is terrible advice. You follow your marketable skills, and your marketable skills, whether that's hitting home runs or really being really good at math, ultimately those are the things that initially make you successful in your career. And they allow you to create the career that you want. They allow you to dictate what you want to be. Think about it. If you throw a baseball 100 miles an hour and you strike out everybody you meet, you're going to get a really good contract. You're going to be able to pick the team that you want to play for in free agency. You're going to get to ask for anything you want in that free agent because you've built a lot of career capitals. I'm passionate about baseball, and I throw a 61 mile an hour accidental cutter. I'm not going to be a major league pitcher, no matter how passionate I am. So I tell that to our interns. I tell that to everybody. Follow your passion is terrible advice. Leverage your marketable skills to create the life that you want.
Yeah, I love that.
I told you guys this guy would be good.
Yeah. Please. Yeah.
That's
right again. Hey Ben, you are the best at this, man. You're so good, Ben. Good job.
Hey, I'm passionate about finding good guests.
Hey Eric, as we start to wrap this up, I want to we talked about the general public, and obviously, you guys as a facility, it's been challenging through the pandemic and getting people here. But talk to the individuals out there in the general population. Darren calls them civilians because he's above them. But talk about what they can be doing to maintain health and maintain strength if they don't have access to a gym. Because you guys have talked about the benefits of resistance training, building power, becoming strong. Now what if they don't have the equipment at home or have the means to get those, and all they can do is go for a run or a walk? I mean, what are the things that people can be doing really to not lose that foundation maybe that they've built?
Yeah, it's a valuable point. And to be honest, it's some of the same stuff pro athletes dealt with. I had guys, in March and April that were front squatting their wives, and we were training them with backpacks only, because guys didn't have anything, but B, even if you wanted to get something, all these equipment suppliers were, I mean, you couldn't buy a kettlebell on the planet in the month of April.
My gosh. Yeah.
Everything got cleaned up.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an important consideration. The things I would tell you is it actually is kind of, as much as it's been a terrible time, like from an exercise standpoint, I think it's actually been cool to see people kind of rediscover what they like. We saw more people kind of working out outside and getting some fresh air and some sunshine, some of that stuff. I think what we lost, we gained in other ways. So I would say, like, as we kind of wrap up, hopefully soon, this craziness in the world, like, take stock of the things you really enjoyed. Like, I know for me, like 2 exercise sessions outside a week, no matter what. And that might just be like me taking the rowing machine in our garage and wheeling out in the driveway for, 20 minutes and getting after it in the sunshine, or going up the street and sprinting at a park or something like that. Those are things that for me will be mainstays forever. Finding walks with my wife and our daughters, like, those are things that I think are important. But the thing you have to remember is with resistance training, like, your body weight is resistance if you use it correctly. And it doesn't take crazy amount of equipment necessarily. Obviously, if you're trying to be a competitive powerlifter, you're going to need a barbell, and even being a professional athlete, you need some external loading, you need med balls to throw and stuff. But you'd be shocked at how many things around the house we had guys utilizing in this time period, whether it was loading up a backpack, lifting cases of water bottles, we had guys filling up coolers, then doing step-ups on the cooler. Like, it was a crazy time, but people made it work. So that's what I'll tell you is, you spend some time on YouTube, you spend some time on Instagram, and you're actually going to come up with some pretty good stuff. There's some pretty good body weight programs out there. But the thing I always come back to is working out by yourself at home. Like, it works for a while. It doesn't work for a lifetime for a lot of people, because they don't have that social element we talked about. So I do think it's important that, as soon as the world allows, that we get to act to some semblance of normalcy with some of the fitness facilities we have.
We had Rich Froning on a little while back, and I was, you kind of alluded to it, that CrossFit is kind of like the extreme, and, there's a lot of bad, a lot of bad thoughts around it, just because, a lot of people get hurt and don't know what they're doing. Yeah. And it's that cult-ish following. But talking to Rich, he really, changed my perspective on it, because the community aspect, the accountability, all those things you're talking about, and the importance as we normalize here and we can get back out, the importance of that, whether it's CrossFit, whether it's, Pilates deal, whether it's Orange Theory, whatever it is, right, is the importance of community. Because I agree, the sustainability of working out by yourself is hard.
We've talked about it before. Struggling with other people just builds you so much closer together. They're so important to have a common goal and struggle with other people.
Yeah. And we talk about embrace the suck, but there's a reason there's a hashtag CSP family at both our facilities. Like, that's something that we've always tried to nurture is, hey, we don't just train you, we train your family. I want to be here as a resource. If you're a baseball player who moves across the country, I want you to know your wife can work out at the facility too. And, like, I can't tell you how many times, like, we've had a player's wife get pregnant, and we've, given them advice about, like, what my wife did for lifting while she was pregnant with twins, and, answer those questions. You just want to be a resource to people and find ways to over deliver. And I think that's been a big part of our success as a company, is always trying to find a way to treat people like they're part of a family and try to over deliver in those contexts.
Sounds like the influence from your mom right there. That's awesome.
There you go. That's it.
As we wrap up here, this has been so helpful and so awesome. We like to ask a question at the end to all of our guests, and we'll ask you here in a second. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about where people can find you. You are so generous with your knowledge. You've literally written thousands of articles that are out there. Where can people find you? Your website, your social media? Where can people find that information?
For sure. So Twitter and Instagram are both at Eric Cressey. EricCressey.com is the website where you can find daily blogs, free newsletter. We've also got a podcast, which delves into the baseball world pretty heavily, but we also touch, on sports science and college coaches and all kinds of different stuff, sleep specialists, you name it. So that's been a cool thing to kind of do. So that's elitebaseballpodcast.com. I think those are the kind of the big heavy hitters.
Yeah, just go Google Eric Cressey. And if you're a young athlete, this guy this is your go-to source right here. Yeah. Eric is awesome. So here's the final question that we like to ask everybody. So you can go back to any point in your life and tell yourself one thing. Doesn't necessarily mean you change anything, but tell yourself one thing. Where do you go and what do you tell yourself?
I probably go back to my early teenage years, and I start having the conversation about nutrition. just to I don't know if there's a specific thing I tell myself, but I try to provide some mentorship in terms of understanding food as fuel for your body and not just calories, and understanding what it actually can do for you and how it can set you up for success, both in terms of athletic performance, maybe as the means of delivering the message, but also, quality of life and what you do academically and all that stuff. I wish, not just for me, that I wish all young athletes would really appreciate that, because it would have changed my life in a lot of ways. Probably would have saved my parents a lot of sleepless nights while I was sick. So that's probably what I would have done.
Yeah.
Awesome. And that is awesome. Hey, Eric, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule.
You
You're a busy man, and we know that everyone's out there requesting you and want you on their podcast or radio shows. But we really appreciate what the conversation we had today. A lot of great information. We want to have you back on at some point. I'm sure I'll drill you down with all my 19-year-old questions.
You gonna send Jaden out to Florida to see him?
Heck yeah!
Hey, like Michael said, hey, pack your bags, son. Go to Florida.
Exactly.
Come out, man. We got some NFL guys around. You can come show them you still got it.
We really appreciate your time. Thanks again.
No sweat. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Hey, Eric.
Thank you.
Great.
No worries, guys. Thanks for
That
having me.
was
That was
awesome,
fun.
man. Thank you.
Once you get it up, send it my way, and I'll make sure to spread the word for you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say we're on about a 5 to 6 week delay just because we're backlogged with episodes recorded.
That's good.
Yeah, no, it's in the podcast world, you gotta.
It's like feeding the monsters sometimes. So when you get some in the well, it's always good.
Yeah. So we'll definitely send you a clip, and we appreciate that so much. Thank you.
No sweat, guys. Have a great weekend. All right.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
All right. Take care, guys.
5 to 6 week backlog? Really?
Yeah.
Jeez. I was talking to the microphone like that. Ben was going to hear me.